You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Bitcoin, Ether, Ripple, Litecoin, and more. Cryptocurrencies and other digital assets are taking the financial world by storm. This exploding market provides everything a savvy trader needs: volatility, volume, and liquidity. Provided you know how to find it. That's where we come in. Welcome to the Crypto Rundown. Each week, we'll break down the latest trading activity, trends, and developments on everything from coins to tokens, futures, and even OTC options. If it's moving the crypto markets, then you'll find it on the Crypto Rundown. This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVol, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVol Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. Now it's time to dive into the exploding world of cryptocurrencies and digital assets. It's time for the Crypto Rundown.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for the Crypto Rundown, the program here on the Options Insider Radio Network, where we go beyond our traditional stomping grounds of the equity options and the index options world and look a little bit farther afield into the realm of all things crypto. Going to talk the Bitcoin, the ETH, and everything else, the options, the volume, the volatility, the SKEW, the OI, the futures, the spot, and a bunch of other good stuff. My name is Mark LONGO from the aforementioned network, as well as, of course, from the ever-exciting OptionsInsider.com. Check it out if you haven't been over there in a while. Of course, keep those reviews coming. Keep those questions and comments coming. We do love to hear from you guys. And let's see who we're hearing from on the program today. We are joined by an old friend of the show, Mr. Greg Magadini, the co-founder over there at Genesis Volatility. Greg, welcome back to the Crypto Rundown program.
Happy to be here, Mark. Thanks so much.
All right, we're happy to have you as we kick it all off with should be an interesting one. It is time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
It's time to explore the latest trading activity, trends, and developments across the world's leading crypto market. It's time for the Bitcoin Breakdown.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Bitcoin Breakdown, the portion of the show we break down the action in the world's leading digital asset. Going to talk Bitcoin. I have to wager we're going to have a few new earlobes joining us on the program this week because everyone and their mother seems to be talking about all things Bitcoin right now. It is making new highs seemingly all the time, then retreating from them almost as aggressively. Of course, a lot going on. We are on the heels here of the 3-year anniversary of the launch of the listed futures here in the U.S. That, of course, changed the game a lot as well. And, of course, we're back at or indeed beyond those price levels that we were approaching when we listed those futures 3 years ago, that magical, mythical 20,000 level. A lot of people thought maybe Bitcoin never really could break. Well, lo and behold, we are beyond it, listeners. Last show, we were at 19,185 towards the end of the show. And today, come into showtime, we're at a little bit shy of the 23,000 level, about 22,788, kicking off the show. So quite a swing out there over the course of the past few weeks. Still, even with today's sell-off, still up over 3,000 handles, 3,600 to be precise. Of course, Bitcoin had a rally above the 24,000 level, right around 24,200. Then it gave a lot of that back, giving off a lot of that today as well. Today, one of the more aggressive downturns we've seen out there in about a month, approaching 6% at one point there. So that's a pretty big drop. A lot of things weighing on that. Some, of course, price exhaustion, also some new rules coming down from the Treasury Department about how to transfer your Bitcoin out of and into wallets, and some of the rules around that, which may be spooking some folks. Either way, seeing a little bit of a retreat out there, but still one of the most rocking and heaviest weeks we've seen pretty much ever since we've been doing this show. It's right up there, and it's certainly on the tail end of a crazy, insane month. So let's start there, Greg. It's been a couple of months since you've been on. It's back since, October 12th was your last appearance. So it's been a good 2 months and change. A lot has happened in Bitcoin in particular. That market has pretty much transformed since the last time you've been on. So maybe catch us up. What the heck's been going on at Genesis since then? And what have you seen in terms of maybe an influx of new business and engagement as Bitcoin has just been off the rails of late, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. So quite a time for Bitcoin for sure. So we've seen a lot of new interest in the option space. We've seen a lot of new interest in the spot space. I think the theme of late 2020 has really been the institutional adoption being sort of the driver to the spot price appreciation. So you have like these legends like Paul Tudor Jones and Stan Druckenmiller who are coming around and saying like, hey, Bitcoin is mispriced here. If you look at the rest of the world and we're passing, $900 billion stimulus deals like we just passed, or we're passing today. And right now the Bitcoin market cap is 424 billion. Something's off here. The Apple market cap is, 2.2 trillion. And equity prices are at all-time highs. You're having, some rally in commodities. So theoretically, crypto could follow. So we're seeing these big players kind of push in that direction. And then we have companies who are also adding to their balance sheet. So we have, Mass Mutual, who decided that they're going to allocate $100 million to Bitcoin. We have companies like Square and MicroStrategy who are allocating balance sheets to Bitcoin. So really this idea that cryptocurrencies are getting adoption in the institutional space bodes really well. Not only does it bode well for prices, but it also bodes well for longevity. So the more institutional adoption there is in the space, the harder it is for, some sort of regulation that would create a wealth destruction in the space. So like you mentioned, regulation is something that is kind of on everyone's mind, and we'll see how that plays out going forward. But we're really happy with sort of the spot price adoption right now. And something else we've been seeing is in the option space. I mean, DEREBIT open interest is, at all-time highs right now. There's about 235,000 contracts of Bitcoin open interest. The volumes are growing a lot. So, for example, the average daily volume of options on DEREBIT has been about 25,000 Bitcoin options trading every day, with kind of peaks around 45,000. We've seen a lot of adoption into the CME contracts. So the average daily volume of the futures is about, a little over 11,000 contracts per day. And the option volume on CME is also growing. So we kind of have those established players who have growing volumes, and then we have new entrants into the space. So we have Bit.com that launched over summer. They offer both futures and options. We have Hobai and OKEX that are now offering options. We have Rumors of Finance launching a traditional options market space. Right now they have sort of these up-down contracts, but they're rumored to launch like a traditional ladder and all the contracts that we're used to seeing. And then we have some innovation in the on-chain space that are launching some of these derivatives. So along with the institutional space, there's kind of this growth in the derivative space. So we're seeing a lot of that. We're really excited. We have new users coming on board every day and looking at our stats and modeling volatility using our tools. And so we think there's a bright future ahead.
Well, you mentioned an interesting point there about the new entrants. Everyone is fixated on the new institutional players, and you just mentioned those. And with good reason. That's kind of where a lot of the volume is going to come from if the crypto marketplace really wants to become a big, quote-unquote, marketplace to rival, the listed options and everything else that's going on out there. But one of the big narratives in the traditional option space of 2020 has been the explosion of retail players and the explosion of new entrants. Call them what you will, the one lot crowd, the Robinhood crowd, whatever. They've been tagged with many different titles, but there's been an explosion of new interest in those players in the options space. I know it's a bit of a different beast in the crypto world because a lot of the small trades is what's been dominating the space for a long time, but I'm curious for you, if you guys have been analyzing this space for a while, have you seen a similar influx in the crypto option space of, call them what you will, the one lot, the retail, the Robinhood folks, even though Robinhood, not really a big player on this side of the fence, but have you seen a big influx of those players in the crypto space over the last few months, Greg, or certainly throughout the course of 2020?
Yeah, so the way that we kind of think about it in our terms is that we view people who are trading sort of the C5 centrally listed options on CME and DEREBIT and stuff like that. Those are kind of players for the most part who already know how to trade options and who are now just trading crypto options. It's the next evolution for them. But then in the world of these crypto natives, and crypto it has been and continues to be a mostly retail asset class. And so as these DeFi solutions come online and these DeFi options come online, you have this segment of crypto native traders who are brand new to options, and they see this new solution in the DeFi space as another vehicle to trade crypto, and they are coming on to trade options for the very first time. So the crypto native base is sort of our Robinhood base in a way. By that I mean they don't have experience with options yet, and they're learning how to trade options for the first time. So that is definitely a growing segment of the options flow for sure.
Yeah, that's certainly been something we've noticed just with the audience of this program. It certainly speaks to a unique crowd that is a little bit different from our usual audience. And we love our hardcore options guys and gals. And they're certainly out there aplenty in the audience in 2020. But for this show in particular, it speaks to that crowd as well as this influx of new people who, as you mentioned, are mostly coming from the crypto world and don't know a thing about options. They don't know SKEW from volatility, from OI. All those terms are kind of scary and new to them. So that's been fascinating to watch the onset of those people come to a show like this and, of course, anecdotally come into the crypto options market overall as well. Let's break that options market down a little bit more. Since your last time you've been on, Greg, you guys at Genesis have become supporters of the show, which is great for a number of reasons, including not the least of which that I get to play around with your system a little bit more these days, which has been kind of fascinating. I like the way you guys break down some of the analytics out there because it's a little bit different from some of the other platforms that we use, and I always find that fascinating because I'm always playing around with a legion of different platforms over here. So if you can hold my interest, it shows that you're doing something good over there. And I like the way you break down the analytics for Bitcoin options, in particular when it comes to the hour-by-hour swings, because we have seen so many huge intraday moves. Back in March, we saw a 30+% sell-off intraday that spooked the hell out of everybody. We're seeing big swings today. So intraday is where a lot of the story happens out there in crypto. So I like to see you guys break it down this way. Let's look at some of that. Let's start with the hourly at-the-money vol out there in Bitcoin. We saw it peak recently at a little bit north of 90, about 91.25 back on the 1st of December. And then we had huge vol swings again intra-week. We hit 90 again back on the 17th. 17th was a big day. We're going to get to that. You're going to hear that date a lot throughout the course of the show, listeners. Hit 90 again on the 17th. Then it dropped precipitously the next day down to about 70%, so about a 20-point vol swing day to day there. And then rally right back up again, another 20 points or so on the 19th. Almost 90, about 87%. So huge swings, of course, just show to show, week to week here on the Crypto Rundown. Last week, it was about 63, almost 64%. And coming into today's show, it's about an 80%. And we said that before, 60% is a huge amount of vol for a major asset class to maintain, let alone 80+%, let alone threatening 100 like it has multiple times over the course of the past week. So a lot to break down. Greg, what's been catching your eye out there on the hour-by-hour skew? And maybe even before we do that, break it down for our listeners. Why did you guys decide to break it down this way and go the hourly route as opposed to the way most traditional analytics platforms break it down?
Yeah, so there's kind of a unique feature to crypto markets, and that is that they're continuous. And so there's kind of two things that we do different from traditional kind of vol measures. So a lot of the traditional markets will look at close-to-close volatility. And for us, we use the Parkinson model. So we basically look at volatility using the high point of the day and the low point of the day, or the high point of the hourly candle and the low point of the hourly candle. And then we applied there's a diffusion coefficient that gets applied, and then you can back out a volatility measure from that. So the Parkinson model, we can use it because we have continuous markets. So we think that's a huge advantage to measuring volatility because it incorporates sort of all the data points. And then we decided to use the hourly just kind of as a way to stay on top of the changes in your modeled realized vol a lot more frequently. So basically, if you got to wait till the end of the day, you got to wait the whole day for that data point, and a lot of things can happen in that day, like you mentioned. So in the crypto space, we've seen a lot of counter trend moves that are like really sharp sell-offs, that are sharp spikes down, that can be huge vol events. But they're short-lived. So if you're looking at a whole day, that pretty much gets averaged throughout the day. But if you're looking at a 1 hour data candle, you can get an idea of, okay, what can vol do in 1 hour? And then you can sort of analyze that and understand that, if I'm trading sort of daily options or options that are expiring in the next 7 hours or something like that, you can kind of get an idea of like what could potentially happen in sort of the crypto space. And so when you're trading these short-dated options, that's a really great tool. And then if you're trading sort of longer-term options, you're trading 90 days out or more, 30 days out, 1 day volatility is pretty much good enough, so to speak. But it's nice to sort of have the option of the two.
Yeah, I like that. I wish more platforms would adopt that. I don't want them to steal your secret sauce there, Greg. I know most options markets are not continuous, so they lack that characteristic. But it is an interesting metric nonetheless. Another interesting metric you guys have cooked up. Traditionally when we're talking SKEW, we're talking your 25 delta call, your 25 delta put, so your 50 delta risk reversal when you add those both together, listeners. That's usually how SKEW is defined and analyzed. You guys, again, decided that wasn't sufficient for your needs. You're going a little bit different, a little tweak to the formula there, looking at a strip of options rather than just a 25 delta call and put. So you're going everything from 30 all the way down to 20, which is also an interesting change. Why did you guys happen upon that, Greg? You just trying to be different, or was there a reasoning behind it?
I like it. Yeah, just trying to be different. No, I'm just kidding. So the reason why we did that strip instead of, extracting sort of a synthetic 25 delta is just because we want to use sort of the existing actual quote data that's out there right now. That's kind of just being quoted at the moment, and not making any assumptions via some sort of synthetic extrapolation. That is something that we'll also provide in the future. It's just on a never-ending roadmap of features that we keep cranking out. But for now, the strip was a nice, clean way of incorporating a wide enough window that approximates about a 25 delta SKEW, but at the same time can incorporate sort of all these data points that fall within that range. So sometimes you don't have a 25 delta. You just have a 22 delta and a 28 delta. And so, one way to do it is to synthetically extract your 25, and another way of doing it is to use the strip. So for now, we have the strip. At some point in the future, we'll probably have both. But that's how we decided to approach and tackle that problem.
Yeah, it's a good workaround too, because you're right. The crypto options, particularly when you first started building this platform, not as liquid as, let's say, your traditional Apple or Tesla or SPY options. So a little bit harder to find the exact strike you may want to look for. So doing the strip you're right, does solve for that issue as well. Let's look at it as well at the 30-20 skew, as you guys call it, which I kind of like. That peaked out recently at about 27.5. That was back in November, actually. On November 30th, we saw it hit about 9.75 on our last show, so obviously well off those November highs. And coming into today's show, it's at a similar level, about 9, a little north of 9, about 9.2. Greg, anything out there over the past week or indeed the past couple of months really catching your eye from a skew shift perspective, sir?
So the skew is something that we've been talking about in our newsletter a lot, over the past month or so. We really think there's so much opportunity in crypto options skew. The skew changes a lot. So, typically skews are a lot more sticky and are a lot slower to take different forms. But with the crypto space, we sort of have this market where I don't know if it's because people have a lot of fear of missing out in crypto or what it is exactly. But we had a couple periods where it's sort of one-way flow, and people will just kind of pile into calls or puts in the case of March earlier this year. And so what happens is that we have this sort of one-way flow in these out-of-the-money options, and then you have skew that the variance of skew itself is pretty high. So the correlation that we've seen between spot price and the skew level has been pretty tight. And so there's been a lot of opportunities there where instead of just playing or betting on spot price itself, you could sort of create a position that would capture sort of the tight correlation that the skew has itself and sort of structure a trade using these out-of-the-money options as opposed to just a spot price. And we've seen so much kind of back and forth there where you can put on that position and then, not even 2 days later, skew has come off 10 ball points, and now you can sort of peel off that position and capture a profit. So we definitely think there's a lot of opportunity there in the skew.
Yeah, that's certainly been interesting to watch. We talk a lot on our TWIFO program, our This Week in Futures Options program that we do every Thursday on the network about the evolution of the skew out there and all those commodity products, your gold, your metals, your soybeans and whatnot. But Bitcoin is certainly no slouch when it comes to the evolution of the skew, and that certainly makes it interesting and more attractive. Maybe a lot of our listeners who are used to the relatively staid skews or something like a SPY or maybe some of the large equity options may be surprised they start looking at a thing like Bitcoin. They're used to the puts being bid, the calls being offered, and that's kind of how things go. And then they come out to a product like Bitcoin, and it's evolving and moving all the time, and that makes it interesting, maybe a little bit intimidating for newcomers, but once you get a sense for it and a handle for it, it certainly, as you mentioned, Greg, is where a lot of the interesting opportunities lie. Let's look on out there, see how many opportunities are being taken advantage of in terms of the OI, how much that OI has grown. We've been talking for a while about how the net aggregate OI has been tilting at that 5 billion notional level for a while. It gets close to it, maybe passes through it ever so briefly, then it comes right back off again and gets up and back down. And lately it's been hovering close to that level. But we crossed it again this week when you aggregate all the different venues out there. You're talking your big dogs, your Derebits, but also your CMEs, your Bit.coms, your LedgerXs, your OKEXs, and all that other fun stuff. You got well north of 5 billion, 5.3 billion just on Derebit of late recently, and north of 6 billion. We add in all of the venues, actually closing in on 6.5 billion out there aggregate last week. So of course you saw some of the weeklies come off and some of that OI start to trend down a little bit, but still coming into showtime, still aggregate north of 6 billion out there. The big dog still Deribit with about 5 billion open. That means there's about 1 billion open on other platforms, which shows interesting evolution and growth on some of these other platforms out there. It's interesting, kind of a nice, so number 2 is OKEX, about 420 million, and then a nice kind of tug of war for number 3 out there. CME just edging out Bit.com. CME had 357 million, Bit.com 356 million. Again, this is all notional, listeners. And then LedgerX coming in behind them at 78 million, and then Huobi distant to them at 7.2 million. And unfortunately, BAKKT still putting up no paper from a crypto options perspective. So still waiting for something to turn on there. In terms of, let's go back to the big dog in terms of DEREBIT. How is that OI shaping up across the board? We've said it before. Greg, when he's been on, has talked about kind of the long-term call bias that exists out there in Bitcoin options, and we're still seeing that dominating the tape out there. Calls at about 130,000, but puts are by no means a slouch at about 81,000 contracts open out there right now from an overall Bitcoin options perspective. Let's break down the week that's been as well. Obviously a very hot, very crazy week out there from a volume perspective. We're pretty close to, if not at, all-time volume highs out there on DEREBIT. The big day was the 17th. Remember I said we'd get back to that day, listeners. 1.1 billion worth of notional going up on DEREBIT that day. That's pretty close to, if not an all-time high. I'll have to check in for sure. Maybe Greg knows the answer to that question. Followed by the 16th, 879 million worth of notional. And on the 18th, 661 million worth of notional out there. So a lot of paper going up. That compares pretty favorably. You got to go all the way back to the end of November 26th, to find anything that even comes close to that. That was 750 million. And most of the other days and the highs we saw were in the 500 million, if not less range. So that 1.1 billion level, certainly a number to watch. Greg, to your mind, is that a new volume record out there on DEREBIT? And obviously there's been a explosion of paper out there over the course of the past week. Any interesting trades or trends catching your eye, sir?
Yeah, definitely. So to answer your first question, in notional terms, that is the record, the 17th. In contract terms, so that's about 9,500 contracts. And then we saw a high of that's about 48,000 contracts. And we've seen a high of 57,000 contracts on July 27th. So in contract terms, it's almost the ultimate high, 2,000 off. And then in notional terms, that is definitely the new record high. As far as kind of the paper that we've been seeing out there, we've seen some interesting block paper go through. So there's been a lot of pickup in block trade volume on DEREBIT, as well as Bit.com and some of the other venues. So again, with that institutional picture, these players who are, bigger players and more well capitalized using block trades to execute some options, we think that's pretty promising. So some of the paper that we've noticed that we think is pretty interesting. Someone did a 300 by 100 a calendar spread. So basically a ratio calendar between the January 1st and January 29th expirations at the $36,000 call strike. They paid about $22,000 for that spread. There's another kind of a call spread. This is a 28 strike versus the $36,000 strike for January 29th. That went up about that call vertical went up about 125 times, paid about $1,000 each. Something else that we think is really interesting, this is probably my favorite, is a butterfly. So we got a butterfly going between the $20,000, $28,000, $36,000 call strikes for January 29th. And that went up 75 times at about $2,200 per butterfly. So definitely there's so many more block trades than that. Those are just some of the big ones that stuck out to me that I think are interesting. So I really think that stepping out block trades in these high vol environments gets you a really good idea of what that sort of professional paper is doing, and is a good way to find inspiration or ride the coattails of some of these other trade ideas.
Interesting stuff. The verticals and the butterflies to the upside, probably not surprising. The ratio calendars, kind of interesting. I'll have to dig into that one myself. That's probably not one of the first ones I would have suspected. But it is interesting, and also interesting to see just more size blocks, as you mentioned, going up. Again, another sign that the big boys, the institutions, starting to take note. I think that 20,000 level, that was just a huge psychological barrier. That was the level it was, or got close to really, when the futures launched, and then everything kind of took a turn for the worse. And there was, of course, the long, protracted crypto winter. I don't need to regale all of you guys with the history of Bitcoin, but it seems like getting back to these levels, particularly right around the anniversary of the launch of the futures, certainly seems to have awakened a new layer of size participants out there. And apparently they're slinging ratio calendars. Who knew? Let's look at the OI. You guys like breaking down your analytics by hour over there at Genesis, Greg. You guys look at OI by hour as well, which is interesting. It kind of shows a couple of things. A, the unique nature of the crypto option space. People they would kill to have this in your traditionally equity options, where we get asked this all the time. How come we can't have OI updated more than once every 24 hours in your typical Teslas and Apples and SPYs and everything else? And I put this to OCC, the clearing corporation, and there's a whole bunch of different parties on both sides of the argument, some who don't want it, some who do. And so it's a muddled mess in the world of equity options. But you guys over there at Genesis are able to break it down on an hour-by-hour fashion in the crypto landscape, which is certainly fascinating. And if you break it down on that level, it peaked out there on DEREBIT, the big dog, on the 18th, so a day later than the 17th. But that makes some sense. You see some paper following on those hot and heavy days like the 17th. Sometimes the OI changes take a little bit to analyze. I hit 217,000 on the 4th of December a few weeks ago. Last week on the show, it was about 203,000. And then coming into today's show, it's still pretty hefty at about 212,000. So, Greg, how are you guys able over there at Genesis to solve this mystery that has pretty much befuddled the entire equity options landscape, sir, about this hour-by-hour OI, sir?
Yeah, well, actually, the exchanges are very good about updating OI right away. So, I mean, each time a trade happens, the OI gets instantly updated. And so we sort of aggregated by hour just because that's sort of our preferred granularity level. But they've done a really good job with this. So that's pretty much how we can sort of work with this data and make it more intraday as opposed to end of day data. And that's allowed us to do a lot of cool stuff. So, for example, we've broken out the changes in OI for different strikes. So you could basically look at it in terms of like, okay, changes in OI for strikes that are on the call side versus strikes that are on the put side versus different expirations. And you can, using our historical data, you can pick out date ranges and see how OI has changed over given periods. So something that we did that I just looked at earlier today was how did the OI change over the past week? And so if you're looking at the put side, the December 25th puts had the most increase in OI. So those increased by about 7,000 contracts. And then on the call side, it's really the January 29th expiration that gained the most OI, increased OI by about 5,000 contracts. So the way that I sort of read that is traders are positioning for potential short-term pullback, but on a kind of the next 30 days time frame or whatever, little over 30 days, they're still expecting some upside. So that's kind of a cool way of looking at it. And then if you want to dig deeper, you could see which specific strikes increase or decrease. And then you could sort of position yourself accordingly.
Now, I'm going to have to amend my answer for everyone who keeps writing in asking that same question about Apple and SPY and Tesla and Facebook. How come they can't see the OI updated more frequently? I'll have to tell them they should start trading crypto options. It's a different ballgame out here. And the thing that is seemingly impossible to do right now in the traditional equity options world has already been done in the crypto world. So everyone who's asking that should check out everything going up on Deribit and everywhere else. Greg kind of just broke it down. Crypto loves a quarterly. We've said it before, we'll say it again, at least from an options perspective, and that still is where the size OI from a monthly perspective is still hanging out. December contract leading the dance with about 84,000 contracts. Jan slipping in there, not quite a quarterly, but still doing some decent paper, 53,000 contracts open out there, and then March right behind it at about 32,000 contracts. And of course, the weeklies are starting to take off with more paper as well, which is kind of interesting sign of an evolution of this product out here. In terms of where the action is from a strike perspective, you've been listening to the show for a little bit. You know that the big dog out there are still those, shall we say, optimistic strikes to the upside. The 36,000 strike actually growing a little bit since our last show. It was at about 20,000 last show, at about 22,000 contracts open on the 36,000 strike. I know it's confusing, listeners. Followed by the actual 20,000 strike at number 2 with about 15,000 contracts open. And then the number 3 strike is the 16,000 strike. It seemed so optimistic not too long ago, and now it's well in the rear view mirror as we're threatening 24,000 to the upside. It's about 14,000 contracts open there on the 16,000 strike. Greg, I'm sure these crazy, outlandish 36,000 strikes have come on your radar. Even more aggressive, or I should say optimistic strikes, gone up in the 50-plus thousand range over the last month or so. What's your take? I've heard differing takes on these upsides. Some people think it's just crazy speculation, maybe uninformed speculation. Other folks thinking that it's just a risk management ploy to take some of the far risk off the table to free it up so they could trade some more options at the more relevant strikes. So what are your thoughts on these, shall we say, outlandish strikes that are dominating the OI and Bitcoin options right now?
It is very interesting. Yeah, $36,000 calls and $52,000 calls. In January 29th expiration, those are like not only are they the most popular strikes and they have the most open interest, but also aggressors are the net longs here. So it's not like people have been selling the $52,000 strike to hedge. No, they've been buying for the market makers as many $52,000 strikes as they can get their hands on. And they're trading kind of, pretty high volatility. So the range of volatilities that the $52,000 strike for Jan 29th expiration has traded is a low of 110 volatility and a high of a 140 volatility. So those are pretty high vols on a very high strike. Talk about optimistic for sure. As far as what's the strategy behind these trades, I couldn't give you a solid answer on that, but it is definitely pretty interesting. So the $36,000 call strike, the way that the first sort of clip of open interest started on that strike was big, large block trades that basically bought 16,000 calls of that $36,000 strike, pretty much all in a couple hours, all on the same day in a couple hours, that basically the first day that the contract started trading. So that person, I don't know kind of what they're hedging that with, or what's the other side of their trade, or if there's another leg out there, or if and I really hope it's just a YOLO trade. I mean, I really hope that someone just did that YOLO trade and basically made a killing on it. But that they essentially paid an 87 vol, and now that thing's trading 115, 120 vol. So it's not only did they make a lot of money on the Delta side of things, but they made a huge amount of money on the Vega side of things. And so it's definitely pretty interesting. And again, I'm not too sure what the rest of their book looks like to sort of merit a position like that. But that leg of it sure did really well.
Yeah, we kind of took issue with them earlier on, but when they first put those prints up. But you're right, from a Delta and indeed from a Vega perspective, that trade has certainly knocked it out of the park. The large block nature of it when it first went up is kind of why I subscribed to that, risk management type of trade. Listeners, if you're out there trading options on a large book, usually have a risk manager looking over your shoulder, and they keep an eye on your net units out there. They want to make sure you're not short a lot of units, and maybe in this case someone was, and so they decided for whatever reason this was the way they were going to mitigate that net short unit risk by buying. It was inexpensive compared to an at-the-money option from a net premium perspective, but from a vol perspective, it wasn't an inexpensive trade yet. Maybe this was the way they decided to take that net unit risk off the table. Either way, this leg has certainly worked out, which is showing just how, let's say, interesting the Bitcoin market has been of late, where these outlandish type trades can work out. Also a good reminder, we've talked in the past on our other shows like the Option Block and others about extremely far out of the money puts in names like Tesla, and how the SKEW and the Vega components can kick in to surprising degrees in some of those. People always fixate on Delta. It's a low Delta call. What can happen? Well, there's a Vega component to it, and there's a SKEW component to it, and those have certainly kicked in to high gear on these otherwise absurd 36,000 options that are going away not that far from now. So crazy times we live in. Let's see how crazy these times have been over there at CME from an options perspective. A pretty active week, probably close to one, if not the most active week ever. I think they had one other week that was pretty close to it when they did some size rolls of verticals out there, but there were some pretty big prints, at least from a relative CME perspective out there. Friday, let's talk contracts. You know I like contracts more than notional, listeners. Friday I did about 261 contracts. Thursday, 406. Wednesday, $1.59. And under 100 the other 2 days, Tuesday and Monday. Remember, that's a 5X contract. So add it all up, multiply it times 5. You get a little bit more of a sense of what's going up out there. On the future side, it's been a very heavy week. Remember, we're pretty much at exactly the 3-year launch date of the CME futures. So much has happened in that subsequent 3 years. It seems like an eternity ago that CME and CBOE were racing each other out of the gate to launch these futures. CME went live 3 years ago. We know how the dust settled on that trade. CME had the 5X contract. CBOE had the 1X. It seemed like the 1X one might be more favorable to a lot of the retail folks out there, but the crypto winter set in, a lot of other things happened, and it turns out the 5X coin contract is still here 3 years later. The CBOE 1X contract, not so much. A very heavy week out there last week. Friday was kind of one of the lighter days, 9,100. We saw 21,500 futures changing hands on Thursday, 17,000 on Wednesday, about 7,000 each on Tuesday and Monday. So big spikes in the middle of the week, right around the 17th and 18th, like we talked about on the other products out there. Greg, I know you guys watch a lot of the main venues like DEREBIT and others, but have you guys been paying more attention to what's been going on out there on CME land? And if so, anything catching your eye out there, sir?
Yeah, we're really excited about CME. So CME data is being incorporated into our platform right now. We're hoping to have it onboarded by early 2021, hopefully by the end of January or early February. But yeah, we're definitely keeping an eye on CME activity, both in the futures market and in the options market. So the option market is still a little light. So there's only 34,000 CME Bitcoin options that have traded since they launched in January of 2020. And just to kind of give you a perspective, if you adjust for the 5X multiplier, that's really about 170,000 options that have traded on the CME Bitcoin futures. And then in DEREBIT land, over the past month, we've had an average daily of 25,000. So, that's about a week worth of volume on DEREBIT is the whole CME since inception Bitcoin option volume. So there's definitely still a lot of catching up to do that CME has, but we're really excited by the growing volumes in the CME option space, and especially the growing volumes in the CME futures space. So the CME futures have been growing a lot. I mean, November was a huge month for CME futures volume. And I think a lot of people look at the basis for the CME basis. So there's kind of like, there's a sort of a different custody profile when you're trading a CME future versus when you're trading a Bitcoin future on DEREBIT or Bit.com or OKEX or HOBI or any of these crypto-centric exchanges, because when you're dealing with these crypto-centric exchanges, you definitely have to custody at least some crypto on the exchange. So you have to, have your Bitcoin over there. But the CME sort of Bitcoin future just deals with dollars, and so you don't have any of the same custody risk. But it also trades at an interesting basis to the spot. So we definitely think there's opportunities there, and we think that sort of this idea of non-custodied futures versus custodied futures, there's definitely some sort of risk differential there as well that people could trade around. So we're excited to have that data, and we'll see how the adoption to CME goes going forward.
Certainly opportunities to be found in the futures, growing opportunities in the options, but now it's time to explore the opportunities that are legion in the altcoin universe.
It's time to move beyond Bitcoin and find out what's moving the rest of the crypto marketplace. It's time to boldly venture into the altcoin universe.
All right, everybody, welcome to the altcoin universe, a portion of the show we break down everything going on outside of the big dog, that is Bitcoin, except for here, we break down the market cap. Kind of hard to escape Bitcoin in that conversation. Number 10 out there, market cap-wise, Polkadot. closing in on about $4.5 billion. Number 9, Binance Coin, $4.7 billion, I should say. Number 8, Cardano, also $4.7 billion. Number 7, Chainlink, 4.9, closing in on $5 billion. Number 6, Bitcoin Cash at about $6 billion. Number 5, Litecoin at almost $7 billion, tick under $7 billion. Number 4, Tether, holding firm at number 4 at about $20.3 billion. Number 3, XRP at about 23.8 billion out there. Number 2, ETH at about 69, almost 70 billion. And the big dog, Bitcoin, over 400 listeners, 425 billion out there. Let's talk now. The number 2 crypto trading asset, of course, we're going to talk ETH. Last show, it was threatening that 600 handle at about 584 and change. Come into showtime today, north of that 600 handle, about 610.5. It puts it up about 25, almost 26 handles from where it was this time last week. Same analysis there out there on the ETH land. The folks over at Genesis like themselves a little bit of ETH. Go figure. Let's look at the 1 hour vol first. Peaked at 107 back in late November 23rd to be precise. Hit similar levels, though not too far back last week at about 101.5 on December 17th. Of course, our last show a week ago was at about a 76%, and coming into today's show at about 86%. So still very frothy out there. Hard pressed to find a lot of assets that are trading a sustainable vol of 86. That's a lot. 30-20 SKEW out here. Similar story. Hit a peak early in December at about a 30 on ETH. December 1st to be precise. On the 18th, it hit about 21.25. On our last show, it was a 7.5, so it evolved from a 7.5 to a 21.25 on the 18th, and then back now to where it is on today's show at about a 12.5, a little bit north of that. So obviously, Greg, you guys at Genesis, like yourselves, a little bit of ETH options, a lot of swings, a lot of changes out there from a vol, from a volume and OI and a SKEW perspective. What's been catching your eye out there over the past few weeks in ETH options, sir?
Yeah, so few things. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on with ETH. It's super exciting. So as far as OI, I mean, we're seeing increasing OI in the ETH space. ETH is definitely the leading altcoin for sure. It's the backbone to all of DeFi, and we think people are paying more and more attention to ETH, and it has a lot of room to go. It's only 1/6 of the market cap for Bitcoin, and then we had this big announcement where CME is saying that they're planning to launch Ethereum futures in February. So we think that that's going to bode very well for ETH price and ETH adoption going forward. It sort of creates another institutional adoption for the people who sort of missed Bitcoin can now sort of get into Ethereum. Obviously, Ethereum and Bitcoin have different value propositions, but the idea is that it is a lot smaller than Bitcoin, and it has potential to run higher. And from a fundamental perspective, it offers a lot of interesting things. You know, DeFi and all these ERC20 tokens are built on top of Ethereum, so Ethereum is just a natural infrastructure for a lot of the crypto space. Ethereum is moving to proof of stake from proof of work, and now will be yielding. So people staking people sending their ETH to ETH 2.0 contract and staking it are going to be earning a yield. And the last time I checked, it was over 10%. And a lot of these exchanges, whether it's Coinbase or Kraken or some of these other exchanges, are offering staking services for ETH. So there's kind of a lot of things going on the fundamental side of ETH. And then on the option side of ETH, we're just seeing, we're seeing high realized vol, like you spoke of, and we're seeing adoption in open interest and higher open interest. So it looks very good across the board, in our opinion.
Does look good. Let's see how those numbers are looking from an overall OI perspective. Again, hourly OI out here in ETH. First, let's break it down overall OI. And again, not quite the call bias in ETH that we're seeing in Bitcoin. Bitcoin still call heavy, call dominated. Call's leading the dance in ETH, but nowhere near as substantial of a margin. About 770,000 contracts open on the ETH side, on the call side in ETH versus 675,000 on the put side. In terms of hourly OI, that hit we're pretty close right now still to the peak we hit back last week on the 18th, about a little north of 1.4 million. And coming into today's show, we're pretty much at about the exact same level, about 1.43 million out there. In terms of volume, notional volume out there on the big dog DEREBIT, also at or around new all-time highs last week. The 17th was the heavy day, 139 million worth of notional going up. The 16th also pretty active, 105 million, and close to it on the 18th, 98 million out there as well. That's pretty close to, at least on the 18th, the recent high we saw a week ago on Monday, which was the 99 million we saw going up out there. Before that, though, the highs were much lower, going back to 51 million, 48 million, 70 million. So these new levels north of 100 million worth of notional are certainly interesting out there in ETH from a volume perspective. In terms of how that volume is breaking down month by month, it still is DEES, the big dog out here by an order of magnitude. DEES is pretty much all the paper. It's going to be interesting to see when DEES goes off the board, how the OI shapes up going forward. DEES has, 668,000 contracts open, and the next closest is March, and it's about 250,000, 260,000 open out there. So a big gulf between DEES and just about everything else out there right now. And in terms of where the action is from a strike perspective, remember we said coming into the segment, we were a little bit north of a 600 strike, about 610 from an ETH underlying perspective. It's still the 400 strike, so a couple hundred points in the rearview mirror, at least from a call perspective, is leading the dance from an ETH options perspective right now. 79,000 open there, followed by the 320 strike. Interesting strikes open in ETH right now. 76,500 of those. Then we go a little bit higher. 480 strike has 71,500. And then if you like the outlandish strikes like we just talked about in Bitcoin, ETH has you covered as well. The 1120 strike dominating the tape to the tune of 65,000 contracts open. So it's a bit of a pick your poison, which strike you want to look at. Greg, a lot to unpack here. First off, obviously a heavy week last week. Anything really catching your eye there in terms of these new highs we saw volume-wise on the 18th and on, or I should say the 16th and on the 17th. And then on some of these, shall we say, interesting strikes that are dominating the OI chart here from an ETH options perspective, sir.
Yeah. So we actually looked at the change in OI for Ethereum as well over the past week. So on the put side, the biggest gainer in open interest is the January 1st expiration. But then when you dig deeper and you can see sort of how the net positioning is across the strikes in that expiration, what we're seeing is that the 620, 630, and 640 puts are sort of the most popular ones, but they're also sort of net short. So basically, retail has been selling these slightly in the money puts on Ethereum, and so that's not very bearish. It's a lot more bullish, if anything. And then on the call side, we saw January 29th, just as in Bitcoin, to be the most popular gainer in open interest, and that increased by about 41,000 contracts. And there we're seeing, again, the belly is where the action is. So people are pretty much long 640 all the way through 800 calls. And then once you start to get farther out at around the 960 mark, the retail crowd is actually short those out of the money ones. So it's very different from Bitcoin, where Bitcoin, the retail crowd, so to speak, is very highly positioned in these out of the money calls. Whereas in Ethereum, they're short the far out the money and really long the belly. They're very long, sort of the near money expiration in the call side, and then actually short that near money strikes in the put side. So that's kind of a very different profile.
Speaking of different profiles, are you concerned at all that so much of the OI is aggregated in that one contract, that DEES contract? Because in about a week or so here, Greg, we're going to see a huge ton of OI rolling off the board. Does that concern you that it's going to change a lot of what we're seeing out there in terms of ETH? Because the numbers are going to change drastically, Greg.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. Yeah, once that rolls off, it's probably going to take a while to sort of build back up. I'm hoping that this hype around the CME Ethereum future kind of helps that along. I think once you have a crypto asset with a lot of different products that can be hedged against, It makes it a lot easier to take positions in options on Derebit and stuff like that. So hopefully that helps. But yeah, you make a great point. It's going to take a while to rebuild that open interest.
I'm hard pressed to think of another options underlying that has such an aggregation of liquidity in 1 month. That's going to be interesting when that rolls off the board. We'll know by our next show if folks have started to replace it or why it's so fixated on that 1 month. That's kind of fascinating. Other altcoin really quickly, Ripple up almost 3 cents, so maybe regaining some of the little bit of the luster that it lost over the week before, but still nowhere near the highs it hit not too long ago. So maybe an interesting, but not quite the week the XRP bulls have been looking for. Bitcoin Cash looking pretty good, up 50, almost 51 handles from last week. And Bitcoin SV up a little bit more, shall we say, reasonable. 7 handles from last week. Speaking of reasonable, let's see if you guys are reasonable with us. It is time to answer your crypto questions.
You've got questions about crypto. Who doesn't? It's time to find out the answers to your crypto questions.
All right, everybody, welcome to your segment. I mean, the whole show is your show, but this is where you guys get to drive the ship. Let's start it off with MCD asking the question we've kind of touched on throughout the entirety of the show. MCD wants to know, have you seen an influx of options volume on Bitcoin during this rally? Well, the short answer is yes. The longer answer is listen to the entire episode we just put in the can before this, MCD, because we kind of broke it down every which way but loose here on the show today. But yeah, it has been a lot of paper, particularly spiking with some new records last week on the 17th and the 18th, depending on which asset you're looking at, if it was ETH or Bitcoin or others, but they all hit or were at pretty much all-time volume highs last week, and we broke down all the changes and what that means for you guys throughout the show, so hopefully you enjoyed it, MCD. All right, next up, this is an interesting one. This comes from Cody. This is a good one for you, Greg, because you guys are crunching the data hour by hour over there at Genesis. He wants to know, what's the weirdest thing you guys have seen in crypto options over the past month? So that's an interesting time frame. The last month has certainly been a weird one. I would put those 36,000 calls in for Bitcoin. I think they went up over a month ago, so I don't know if they fall precisely in that time frame. But those certainly qualify. And then the subsequent, I think, 52,000 calls, those certainly would qualify as weird. But Greg, what do you have to say here for Cody? What's the weirdest thing you guys have seen over the last month?
Great question. So there's quite a few different things that stand out. So we actually see trades go at zero implied vol sometimes. So that's a little bit weird because I mean that's basically free money if you can just go hedge it out in the underlying. So that's something that we see sometimes. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is we see a lot of these really deep in the money options trades. So you'll see trades at like the $40,000 put trade, or you'll see the $10,000 call trade. So you see a lot of these like deep in the money options trades. And so I'm not too sure what the strategy behind that is. Maybe there's a convexity play with the futures hedge. But there's definitely something interesting going on there as well.
Yeah, we have noted a few of those deep in the money prints, and you're right, they are kind of weird because those are usually a telltale sign of something that goes up in a product that has a less liquid underlying. For example, we used to see that until recently in the spikes, which are kind of a VIX alternative, and the underlying was halted by the CFTC. So there was no underlying. So people were trading deep in the money spikes options as a way to synthetically create and get exposure to that underlying. So that makes sense in a product like that where there literally is no underlying trading, but there is an underlying and it's fairly liquid out there in the Bitcoin realm. So yeah, to see those similar types of trades going up, that is a little bit strange. I guess I'd have to say, probably for me, Cody, it would definitely be those outlandish upside calls. And the fact that they're working out, again, we don't have the other side of it, so we don't know for sure. We can just look at that one leg. But that one leg has worked out pretty well. Here's one for you, Greg, to wrap us up here. This comes from El Dorito. El Dorito wants to know, can he trade Bitcoin options through Genesis Volatility's system? So obviously he's looking at your platform, Greg. He's liking what he's seeing. He's crunching the numbers. He's checking all the analytics. He wants to know if he can hit the trade button, sir, at Genesis Volatility.
So no, we don't offer any execution. We're just purely an analytics platform. We have some partners that take care of the execution side. So Paradigm is one of our very good partners, and they do pretty much all the block trading. So if you're ever interested in executing block trades, I would go to Paradigm. And then for the analytics, we're the analytics choice. We only offer analytics and no execution.
I think that's a smart choice for now there, Greg. Stay out of those bloody waters for a while. A lot of people crowd in the execution side of the Bitcoin space. Unfortunately, that theme music is crowding us out of this show, listeners. That means we're coming up against it. But before we go, Greg kind of just touched on it, but you guys are cranking out a lot of interesting new stuff. You guys seem like every time I turn around, you have some new feature upgrade or some new tweak. So if our listeners are intrigued and they're listening to this show, so I'm guessing they are intrigued. They want to know about some of those new features you guys have coming out, or maybe some of the stuff you just released. Leave us a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a tease here, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to visit us at gvol.io. We have a free tier and we have a paid tier of services. And so we've been releasing kind of new features pretty much every month. And we're in the process of doing some CME data, as I previously mentioned. And then kind of our next iteration will be some of these DeFi data points. So that's something that we're really excited about as well, is sort of capturing a lot of the edge that lives out there in the DeFi world.
There we go. You also have the newsletter as well, which I highly recommend if you're interested in things going on between episodes of this show. I know there's nothing else but this show, listeners, but things do happen outside of our episodes. There's a whole week going on out there, so check it out at the newsletter. And Greg, if folks want to try out for the free trial or check out the newsletter and all the other stuff you guys do, where should they go? What should they do?
Yes, the newsletter is at genesisvolatility.substack.com. And then our Twitter handle is GenesisVol, at GenesisVol. And then our website and our web app is at gvol.io.
There you go. Check them out for all the stuff we talked about here on the show today and a whole bunch more. And on behalf of Greg, everybody over there at Genesis Volatility, and indeed myself, I want to thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for listening live, for sending in your questions and voting in our polls and everything else that you guys do. Keep it coming. Remember, if you like what you hear, this program is certainly a unique beast. Not much else out there in the landscape really like it. So if you like what you hear, keep those reviews coming in your platforms of choice. Wherever you get this, it really does help new folks continue to discover this program and indeed the network. And certainly with Bitcoin exploding over 20,000, there has been a lot of new earlobes out there joining us these days of late. Love to see that, so keep those reviews coming. And of course, we'll see you back here next week. We got one more before the end of the year here with another episode of the Crypto Rundown.
This program is brought to you by Genesis Volatility, also known as GVOL, home of institutional-grade crypto options analytics. Whether you're trading CeFi options or DeFi options, cryptocurrencies move. Use GVOL Analytics to analyze implied volatility, model realized volatility, structure positions, and unlock alpha. For more information, visit gvol.io. That's GVOL.io. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.